It's good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millsy, back from Hometown Commander, back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I take my first pass at the commander in front of us on a budget on my quest out brew the magic world. You know the motto, baby. It's ABB, always be brewing. That's what we're back to do today. That deck list is going to be down in the description for you below. As always, I'd really appreciate if you could interact with the video, like, comment, subscribe. Consider checking out those links down in the comment section below, or description below, and please let me know what commanders you want to see down in the comments. Today, we're updating an old favorite of mine. It's a deck that I've done for the channel once or twice, and it's also a deck that I've enjoyed playing, and I thought it's been enough time, let's go back and update Kyler Sigardian Emissary. A 5-mana Selesnya human cleric that says whenever another human comes into our control, we're going to put a counter on Kyler. And then all of our other humans get a buff for each counter on Kyler. Humans have always traditionally been a tribe that are very good at going wide, so this makes a lot of sense for Kyler. And green and white are two great colors for counters matter support, so this kind of works really well. We have ways we could try to protect Kyler. We have ways we could just buff our entire board, and then just, end the game with our humans in combat. But I want to say a quick thank you to the channel members. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. If you're interested in seeing all our videos just a little bit early for just $1 a month support, I'd appreciate you checking that out down below. The truth is, with a tribe as big as humans are, you're gonna have your pick of the litter as far as what humans you want to play. And what I think Kyler does best is trying to marry humans that make tokens with humans that just have overall good value. So you have things like Adeline, who's gonna make a 1/1 human attacking each opponent whenever you attack during your turn. Nice thing is that Adeline doesn't have to attack, so if Adeline's come in that turn, you could still get the trigger, and you're going to get Kyler triggers. The best part about Kyler with Adeline is those 3/1/1s, right, are going to then immediately make them all into 4/4s, which is pretty cool. Bastion Protector is just going to give Kyler indestructible, which is a big deal. Anything we can do to make it a little bit harder to remove is just going to help our game plan. Baragond of the Guard is one of a few humans from Lord of the Rings that has a pretty nice effect. Whenever it or another human comes in, creatures you control are going to get a certain ability. And for Baragond, it's +1/+1 in Vigilance, which is really nice because, of course, Vigilance just encourages you to attack and still be able to be back and block. But hey, if you have 2 or 3 humans enter in a turn, you're talking about a +2/+2 +3/+3 buff, which is a lot and will make a difference in the grand scheme of a couple combats. Champion of Lambholt has an ability that whenever another creature comes in, you put a counter on it. And then its key ability that works really well with Kyler is that creatures with power less than Lambholt cannot block creatures we control. This is a huge deal because remember that Lambholt doesn't really need any counters on her. Kyler's going to provide it all with all the counters on him, and going to just hopefully make our creatures unblockable. Coppercoat Vanguard going to hand out a little buff in Ward 1. Really nice to help deal with some of that interaction. I think more often than not in our format, you're going to notice that people only leave up enough mana for their removal. So even something like Ward 1 can be a really big deterrent and really help you out in setting your opponents back, right, by having to remove our things. Then, of course, we have Greymond, a.k.a. Rick from the Walking Dead Secret Lair. Probably one of my favorite humans we have access to in a deck like this. And when he comes in, you're going to choose 2 abilities from among First Strike, Vigilance, and Lifelink. I don't think there's any bad 2 choices there. I always like First Strike and Lifelink a little more than Vigilance, but I think there's a lot of arguments for which you'd rather have. All of our humans have those abilities, and then as soon as we have 4 more humans, all of our humans get a buff. And this is just great. This just leads to more damage, specifically with the lifelink. This leads to probably a lot of life being gained, especially when you remember that Kyler's buffing all of these creatures, right, with his ability. Blade Elite gets a counter on it whenever another human comes in, and then can just tap for mana of any one color equal to its power. So again, great with Kyler, right, because Kyler's going to buff it up. Catilda lets all of our humans tap for mana, which is nice. Allows us to cast more spells. Lawsonark Captain, another one of those Lord of the Rings humans. Whenever another human or it comes in, you tap down a creature an opponent controls, get some key blockers out of the way, or tap down an opponent may want to use for a certain ability to have them have to do it out of time. There's a lot of different ways we can take advantage of Lawsonark Captain, but then on your upkeep get a 1/1 human. So then every turn, right, you're at least buffing Kyler by 1. Master Seymour at the start of combat on our turn puts a number of counters equal to its power on another target creature. Um, this you really can look at two ways. You could be trying to buff your other creatures, or you could just continue to put all those counters back on Kyler. And basically, what you're doing is just growing your board even more every time. And I think it's easy to always want to say, "Oh, well, I just want to buff Kyler." But the nice part about abilities like Master Seymour is even if Kyler gets removed, hopefully, you could start buffing other creatures too. Mikaeus is basically just here to help us spread out counters onto all creatures we control. Again, buff the whole board. Remember that when you activate Mikaeus' second ability, putting a counter on each other creature you control, you're putting a counter on all of them, right? And Kyler, so Kyler's going to effectively make this a +2/+2, right, on all those creatures, which is really nice. Odric has a really fun ability. Whenever it and at least three other creatures attack, we choose which creatures block and how they block, effectively meaning we can make our whole board unblockable. Sage of the Skies allows us to get a copy of it if it is our second spell we cast, just allowing us to, or third or fourth or whatever. But again, just a great attacker in the air. Silk makes us 1/1s whenever we cast creatures. Spider-Man, whenever it attacks, is going to put a counter on each other creature and give them trample. Again, really nice when Kyler's really going to be buffing our board. Thalia is going to get our opponent's things in tap. Torrens, just like Silk, is going to make us humans whenever we cast creature spells. So again, we're getting more right value off each human we're casting. And then Wild Beastmaster is a pretty fun effect. Whenever it attacks, each other creature gets +X/+X, where X is its power. So again, gonna kind of effectively double, really double Kyler's buff, right? And get more power across the board. But I don't think it's just about the humans. Like, I think we really want to care about the counters too. I mean, obviously, you have something like the Ozolith. Whenever a creature that had counters on it leaves the battlefield, you put the counters on the Ozolith, and then every turn during combat, you can put those counters onto that creature. Again, makes sense for Kyler, right? Because then you're just immediately buffing your board. But I really like Invasion of Gobakhan. So on the front side, it lets you pick a card out of somebody's hand and kind of get rid of it. But on the back side, Light Shield Array becomes an enchantment that whenever a creature, beginning your end step, you put a counter on each creature that attacked that turn. And then you can just sack it to give all creatures you control hexproof and indestructible. I really like this ability because it just ends up giving you a free way to protect your board. And it's not going to be very hard to flip it over, attack the battle, and flip it over. And then you're getting passive counters every turn on all your humans. And you have a one way to protect your board that doesn't require mana. Branching Evolution and Hardened Scales both affect the number of counters that would be put on something. Branching Evolution is just going to double the amount of counters, whereas Hardened Scales is just going to add one. Again, both of these are great abilities and are going to really help you start to grow Kyler quickly. Another thing that can grow Kyler quickly is Cathar's Crusade. This, paired with Kyler, is really fun because remember, Kyler's always going to get the counter whenever a human comes in, right? But what Cathar's Crusade says is, just when any creature comes in, you're just going to go ahead and put a counter on every creature you control. So now you're not only are you just getting the counter on Kyler, but you're getting the counter on everything. And kind of like what we talked about with, Lost on Arc Captain or all these effects that are spreading out these abilities. Now you're getting really +2/+2 out of it or more, right? Because of Kyler's ability. And so you could start to see where pairing these effects together can start getting really brutal when all you need to really do is get one or two extra humans in and you're buffing your board so much. Innkeeper's Talent hands out that counter at the start of each of your combats, and level 2 is really where Innkeeper's Talent becomes great because you add that ward 1. Again, like we talked about with our card before, Ward 1 can be a really big difference. Sphere Grid gives all creatures we control with counters on them reach and trample. The goal of playing something like Sphere Grid isn't just to give Kyler himself reach and trample, but it's to then play enough ways to get counters on all of our humans so they can have reach and trample as well. Because remember, trample's the key ability we really want. You've got Kyler with 5 or 6 counters on it. All your creatures are buffed by +5/+5, +6/+6. That's a huge buff not to have trample, right, to back it up. And then Virtual Loyalty, beginning of your end steps, you just put a counter on all your creatures and untap them. Again, my philosophy here is that raising the floor of all of my creatures is going to be strictly better than just always raising Kyler. And so, because Kyler is going to be such a lightning rod for removal, if I'm still raising the floor of all my creatures, they're going to be harder to deal with than if I'm just focusing everything on Kyler himself. And I think it also makes sense to look into just more cards that affect our outcome here, right? I mean, Garrick's Uprising is always a card that comes up for me giving all your creatures trample, and then drawing cards if you have big enough creatures come in. But again, humans have their own swath of support. Laid to Rest draws you card whenever a human you control dies, and whenever a creature you control with a counter on it dies, you gain some life. And then Horde of Gondor comes in and makes a human token. Then every turn for 3 mana, you can just make a number of human tokens equal to the number of humans you control. And this is an ability that can get really out of hand with Kyler quickly because the more humans come in, right, the bigger Kyler is, and just the bigger your board becomes. Note that that is an ability you can use at instant speed if you wanted to, which could really affect a combat, right, and could really make a big difference. So it's one of those abilities that, use it when you want to, use it to be smart, and, can really affect the board state. But I've said it before on the show, and I'll say it again. No deck's ever complete. Although we've covered Kyler in the past and we're updating it, I still think there's a lot of things we can learn in testing. And the first key thing in the back of my mind is, do we have enough protection? We are playing protection spells. Do we want to add more of them? Things like "And They Shall Know No Fear," or I think right now we're playing Flawless Maneuver, Flare of the Fortitude, and Unbreakable Formation because it adds counters. But you could look into more. Do we need to play more protection spells? Do we need to find more ways to just protect our board en masse? Do you want to play more mass buff things like Banner of Kinship or Eldrazi Monument to protect your board and give them indestructible? You could look into more of that if you think you need it. I think Kyler does a good enough job, but again, everybody has their preference. Maybe someone wants to have a little bit more reassurance that they're going to have these buffs for their humans, even if Kyler dies. And so I could understand why somebody would want Banner of Kinship, Coat of Arms, things like that to help protect their board that way. And then I've always liked the idea of Dazzling Theater and Prop Room. I think both of these sides of this room are really good. Dazzling Theater allowing your creature spells to have Convoke, allowing you to help, right, tap your humans to cast things. Prop Room is untapping all of your creatures during each other player's untap step, just allowing you to always have them up to block. I mean, that stuff is stuff that makes sense to me. We've tried to add some abilities in the deck that give them vigilance, but I think the idea of Dazzling Theater does add some added value, and so that could be something that we'd really want to look into. Is, do we want to look into Convoke or more ways to tap our tokens for mana so we can constantly be putting out either more humans or more support pieces for our board? But let's do what we love to do on the channel the most and get into our playtests. Remember, the goal of playtests on our channel is not to find magical Christmas land. It's not just to show off all our best plays, but to get in some gameplay scenarios and kind of understand what hands are we looking to keep, what and how we're going to set things up. So here I've got a 3-lander with two important mana dorks. Avacyn's Pilgrim's great. It's just a 1-drop that taps for a white mana, kind of our Llanowar elves and humans, and we love it. We also see Sumberwald Sage, which can tap for 3 mana of any one color, but can only used to cast creatures. So that's pretty useful. We see Catilda there, can help our creatures tap for mana. We see Torrens there, making the 1/1s when we cast creatures. So the really nice thing here is that we're going to be able to start really building our board. I think I kind of like Sumberwald Sage here. Again, getting our mana out really quick. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I can get Kyler in. And I think the answer is Catilda. Get the counter down, because remember, Catilda can start allowing our creatures to tap for mana, which can help us as early as this turn. 3 mana only for creatures, 4 that can't. So, I mean, I love the idea of something like Garruk's Uprising. My thought is almost Garruk's plus Torrens. That puts a counter here. I guess we could do Torrens in and then Garruk's, because then Garruk's would draw us a card from Kyler, right? And then I could technically tap what? That was for Torrens. Although it's only a mana of any one color. I could tap something like Catilda to play the Coppercoat Vanguard, put that there. That's going to make us that 1/1 human soldier with training. And then this is a great turn because now we've really started to add, value onto Kyler. This can attack. I mean, all these came in this turn. They can't attack, but Kyler's a 6/6, 7/6 because of the Vanguard and Kitty getting attacking. And what I really like now, in a moment like this where Kyler has a few counters on him, is now your mana dorks don't have to be mana dorks anymore. Now they can be attackers. They're getting +5, +4 right now off of Coppercoat Vanguard and the Kyler, and have trample. But again, I'd probably go Summerwald plus a Plains for Baragond. Again, you're going to end up with two counters on this turn, one from Baragond, one from the Soldier. Mind you, the Soldier is going to be on cast, so Lost Ark isn't, or sorry, Baragond's not going to see that Soldier come in, but it will see himself come in, give her a whole board Vigilance. And so now, I mean, everything but the Summerwald Sage can attack, and then remember now they can all tap for mana. So even main two, we could, play more things, right? Now, my other thought was, if I give up these two creatures, I could Chroma's Will, but I think a Chroma's Will almost makes more sense for next turn. That's a good one-sided offensive wipe because you effectively give all your creatures the ability to not be blocked, double strike, lifelink. I mean, the bigger Kyler is, the more damage and the more life that's going to gain us. I'd almost focus to try to do that next turn, but note you can use it defensively if you had to give them all indestructible. But again, I just take the big attack. They all have vigilance. They basically have +6, +8, +7 right now this turn, and vigilance, and they all have trample, so they're going to deal a ton of damage. Remember, Kyler doesn't buff himself, but he's still sitting at a 8, 8, 9, 9, 10, 9, so he's still a great threat. And then, like I said, the next turn I probably just play a Chroma's Will, and we're off to a lot of hurt there if nobody has a really good answer. Playtest 2 here, we got a 3-lander with Shalinda. Shalinda puts a counter on another creature when it comes in if its power is less than her. Otherwise, she gets a counter. We see Nature's Lore for some ramp. There's Baragon. There's Farewell for some removal. And I definitely do not hate Horn of Gondor there as a draw, right? It's going to be a very useful card, right, when we start getting humans in and just start doubling up the number of humans we have for some big value. So here, right, we're one mana off of Kyler, so we can't exactly guarantee Kyler in. I kind of like the idea of something like Baragond. I like the idea of something like Horn of Gondor just to guarantee more humans in. Let's go Baragond and just see what we get into. All right, so we missed the land drop, which isn't ideal, but it unfortunately was going to be a possibility, right, when you don't have it in your hand and you don't have more ramp. Here we'll make that Human Soldier. Going to give Baragond life, vigilance and let it go in. Here again, we missed the land drop, which again kind of stinks, but we have to keep going, right? We have to keep finding ways to promote our value. It is 3 to tap the Gondor. Almost wondering if it's worth it just doing that. I mean, I love the Sage. It's a great attacker in the future, but I'd almost really like to be able to get it. Just make 2 of them attack with the Vigilance. This is an odd one again because we ran out of lands. I think actually Greymond really helps there. Give us the first strike and the lifelink, or the vigilance and the lifelink. Or I think the first strike makes more sense, right? Since Baragond's handing out vigilance, and just gain a bunch of life this turn is my thought. And then there we go. We unfortunately have our 5th land. It's just going to come in tapped, which kind of stinks, but that's okay. At least we know now we're guaranteed for Kyler next turn. So I think I would just tap the Horn of Gondor here, make 5 humans, give these all a big buff, get them in attacking. And now this turn, you can get Kyler in if you want to. But I almost feel like, is it worth it? Probably to just Unbreakable Formation and take the attack. Give him the counter. You're gaining so much life back. This is also now defensive. We could Horn of Gondor and hold this up. This is one of those ones where I think Greymon does a great job at really buffing our board and can get us there in scenarios where we can't get Kyler in, because now I don't think you really even mind that you can't get Kyler in, because Horn of Gondor with Baragond actually acts like a really decent substitution. So what we could do is we could actually attack right now. Remember, we can use this Horn at instant speed. We have, 10 humans? We can basically go to attacks, and if people don't block right, you just dump the Horn of Gondor, make 10 humans. They're all now getting +10, and they've already got the +2 from Greymond. So they're sitting at 13s, and if they're not blocked, now that's damage just, first strike because we chose that. It's lifelink, so now you're just gaining so much back, and then you still have the formation right to protect the board. So there's one of the odd examples where we couldn't get Kyler in right away, but we got to see the value that's still there using things like Cathar's Crusade or other of those buff enchantments that can buff our whole board. Here on Playtest 3, we see a 3-lander, a 4-lander. There's Shalinda. There's the Hardened Scales. There's Torrens. So I didn't mean to do that. So here we go. We're starting to see some of the value come in. Fortified Village. I almost want it to be Shalinda, but I think I'll get the Hardened Scales down. I almost want to wait for Torrens. I was going to say, ideally, I want Torrens into Kyler, but we just don't see the ramp. We'll play Sigardian here, though, since I can't profit from either of Torrens or Kyler for it. Just going to give all of our other permanents hexproof, and we can cast Angels and Humans from the top. Again, I think I like Kyler here. Again, that's going to make the human on cast. Remember that that human, of course, won't be able to, we won't see it with Kyler because it's on cast, right? But at least now we're protecting ourselves, right? We know that this next turn can have some really big value because we can start casting multiple humans. So, you go Copper Guard. Get this, that's 2 counters, right? 2 humans came in. Got 4 mana left. I love the idea of something like Surat can draw some cards if our opponents start targeting our things. But again, a couple more right counters on Kyler, and now you take the attack with Kyler. You take the attack with Torrens. You take the attack with the one soldier that could attack. It's going to get traininged from either Kyler or Torrens when it attacks, so it's going to end up with a counter on it. And now I just realized it should be more than that, right? Because the Hardened Scales. But either way, now you're getting a big buff. You're getting some big attacks going through. Now we have the Flare to protect us. Shalinda, right? Soldier and Shalinda. And then again, just continue to take the attacks. Here's your free way to protect the board. You can either give up Shalinda to do it or one of your other white creatures. But again, you just continue attacking. I mean, you don't have trample, but I don't think you care because you're just going to be dealing some big damage. Your opponents are going to have to deal with things like Sirach that has trample, right? And then, the next turn, fortunately, we didn't hit a human off top, but now you have even more protection and you just keep attacking, right? I think at this point, you're happy because you don't even care that you can't make more tokens. You're just going to keep attacking, right? Keep getting the pressure on with Kyler having all these counters on it. And again, trample, lifelink, you could start to see where the value sits there if your opponents can't deal with Kyler, right? Because Kyler can just put so much power across the board. And I think that's what makes it so dangerous is the amount of power it can really spread on your board very quickly. Playtest 4 here, we're keeping the 2-lander. There's the Hardened Scales. We got the Nature's Lore for some ramps. We're still at least a land down, but we see things like Falconer, which can give our creatures with counters on them flying. Really great to pair with something like the Talent, which can start to hand out counters. All right, well, there's another land, right? So we're not completely out of the woods just yet, or out of the way just yet. We'll go Nature's Lore, I think, here. Go get one of our duels. Again, just continue to ramp when we can. Now I've got 4 mana. I love the idea of the Gobakon. My thought was almost the Innkeeper's Talent. Little awkward, right, if we don't get another creature in, but there we go. We hit it in the brushland. Get this here, gets a counter from the Innkeeper's Talent, and can't go after that Gobakon just quite yet, but we're going to start getting there. So now, right, Tuskar gives out Trample to creatures with counters on them. Falconer gives out Flying. I think I do this. The other 3 mana, I get down the Falconer. Start a combat, I'll give, I guess, a counter to like the Falconer. Again, we could put it on Kyler, but I almost love the idea of oh yeah, no, 4 was right. I almost love the idea of putting on Falconer just to get another one of them into the air. But I guess the argument could also be that you just put them on Kyler and buff the board some more. I mean, I'm sure there's arguments back and forth on what that would be, but that should allow us to flip that Gobakon pretty ideally, and then get a couple counters because it attacked. There you go. There's the Bastion. Right, protect it, or since you already have the protection, you could just go for Odric. Remember, Odric has to attack, so I mean, I think the ideal thing would be to have the 7th mana, right, to get Odric down 2. But maybe it's Odric down this turn so that you can set that up for next turn. Tuskguard could outlast itself. Level up the talent, so now anything with a counter on it has ward 1. Put the counters on Kyler, have these 2 attack, flying, trample. And then, maybe on our turn, now's when you play the Bastion. And then now Audra can make them all unblockable. And again, sorry, that would have got counters. That would have got counters last turn off the Light Shield Array. And again, I think we hit to the same spot. Again, one of those decks where if your opponents can't interact with you and you can go wide very quickly, you're going to have a great time. You're going to probably bowl over your opponents and you're going to have a great game. But the goal, I think, of a deck like this is going to be that if you can't get Kyler to stick, and if Kyler does get removed, you need to make sure that your deck has enough other firepower that we can still keep going. And that's my hope with the deck, is that we can still spread counters on our creatures, go wide enough, keep getting value in, and still taking the fight to our opponents, so that when we can eventually get Kyler back, or we can get Kyler in, he can become a threat. Otherwise we could just keep doing the humans game plan and having a good time. But I'd love to know, what do you think of Kyler down in the comment section below, and I will catch you all